Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, bribers, vibers, and would-be subscribers, welcome along to the Joe Spivey YouTube channel, where we discuss books and little else. And you join me on a pretty decent Friday, folks. There is outside, just a little word of warning before we get into this, there is outside if you do hear the sort of near-death screams of a bird of prey, that is because there is what appears to be a hawk outside of my bedroom window that sounds as if it's having its wisdom teeth removed. So if you do hear, as I say, the near-death squeals of an animal, that is it. And again, just before we start, there is also a little bit of a media furore, a bit of a maelstrom at the moment in Britain and therefore in the slightly wider world for a darts player by the name of Luke Littler, ladies and gentlemen. Darts used to be the profession and preserve of some rather rotund, sweaty, lager-swilling dolts who used to attend pubs and other dens on a weekly basis, public houses, that type of thing. It was then professionalised by the PDC, and the admittedly quite enjoyable experience of watching somebody smash a small missile into a coloured target was monetised, and they now earn very many millions of pounds a year. And it was indeed the World Darts Championship just recently, across December and January in the Alexandra Palace in London, and a gentleman called Luke Littler, who was heretofore unknown and is now famous, got to the final stage. He was a relative amateur, and he was mixing it up with the best of them, with the professionals. And now he is. I'm sure if you were to type in Luke Littler darts player on Google Images, that would bring up an image of a gentleman who is very obviously 35 years of age. He has a full beard, which I could never attain in a month of Sundays. He has, all of the middle-age spread of somebody, approaching their 40s, and yet he is purportedly 16, folks. So I'm not denying the fact that he was 16 at one point for 365 days, but that time has since passed. There was once in America a regrettable and bigoted call for Barack Obama's birth certificate to be publicised because, a few racists in the Republican Party couldn't countenance the fact that a man of colour, heaven forbid, might be allowed into the White House. But I think there ought to be calls for Luke Littler's birth certificate to surface because that guy don't look 16, folks, okay? To suppose that he is 6 years my... is that right? Yeah, 6 years, nearly 6 years my junior of this admittedly quite juvenile fella. To say that he's 6 years my junior is frankly ridiculous. I know I'm a little bit wet behind the ears and boyish, but... that bloke ain't 16. Anyway, let us begin. Welcome to, if you are a new subscriber, one of the throngs, welcome back to my Slashing at Hacks series, where I take myself and my abundant liquidity down to a supermarket here in Hull in the north of England, and I purchase a magazine and have a read of it, look at it, evaluate it, and share some of my thoughts with my darling viewers. This time we have gone for The Fence, which after a little bit of research informed me that it's a biannual look into, some sort of experimental and avant-garde topics. Obviously the title is riffing on the much maligned status of fence sitters. Sitting on the fence is to be neutral in an argument. Heaven forbid somebody be neutral when somebody's reproductive rights are under question, or the right to bear arms is under question. Heaven forbid that somebody doesn't just rush to a judgment. Such neutrality is much maligned in our society these days. But yes, anyway, it starts off with misinformation right from the get-go. It says the UK's only magazine, which I think would probably see it lose in a court of law due to the Advertising Standards Agency, but it's got cartoons on the front here, as I'm sure you'll see. Supposedly all of these are well-known celebrities, folks, or they have some sort of cultural access point. The only person I got, it tells you on the inside cover who everybody is, but I got Salman Rushdie there, rather obviously. I got Ian Hislop, the editor of Private Eye there, rather obviously, and Barbara Windsor, who was in the famous British Carry On films. But everybody, there's a bit of RoboCop here. There is the hairy biker, one of two chefs who hail from Newcastle who have amassed some not inconsiderable wealth from making very standard food indeed, but apparently there's all sorts of people there that are famous. So if you know who any of them are, apparently that's Rene Descartes, but if you know who any of those guys are, then answers on a postcard, folks. But yes, let us get into this. It's got non-fiction and fiction, but I must admit that I felt for the majority of columnists in this particular edition were using a very fortunate and hard-to-come-by position as a syndicated journalist and columnist in a relatively leading pamphlet/magazine to essentially just exercise their own demons and talk about themselves and self-flagellate in a non-cathartic way. Yeah, they're just really bizarre, very, very solipsistic and introspective, which we talked of yesterday. It seems to beset us everywhere, folks. But this is an article by Rosie Hewitson. It's titled "You're the One, Ellie Roebuck," and this is about what might we say? The fact that many people draw conclusions from the fact that a preponderant amount of the participants in women's football, that's women's soccer for you guys in America, happen to be homosexual. For some reason that's of interest and somewhat alters people's opinions of the sport. For some reason that's relevant. I'm not sure why, but it's looked upon sometimes with a suspicious eye. But anyway, so it talks about all that, and it talks about how some Twitter pages have been set up to speculate about the comings and goings and trysts and tiffs. But then it goes on to say, not every fan agrees with the attention that this facet of women's football receives. There are those who argue that it's an annoying distraction from the merits of the sport itself, one that perpetuates the notion that women's football can't, or shouldn't, be taken as seriously as the men's game. There are times when the insatiable appetite for gossip constitutes an invasion of privacy. Now, I think I have made it a little bit of a modus operandi of mine, or a little bit of a continuing objective of mine, to use this channel as a little bit of an avenue to discuss the peculiar and noteworthy difficulties of the female experience. I'm perfectly happy to admit that there are innumerable ways in which it is pretty much very, very much more difficult to be a female in this world than it is to be a male. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule, yada, yada, yada. But I think I have made it my goal and, not to be too temerarious, but a bit of a success of my channel to, put up the difficulties of women and talk about that in literature, yada, yada, yada. And I know this is usually how every single bigot prefaces their argument. I know I'm doing the I've got lots of black friends line, but okay. A key notion... I don't like women's football or rugby. That's my first point. A key prerequisite of the enjoyment of professional sport, I think, is not only a little bit of contentious jeopardy as to the outcome and, a little bit of a quagmire as regards what will be the result, combative forces, decussative forces coming together, but also the observable... the observable evidence that the people you are watching are proficient practitioners of that sport. And for swimming, and for tennis, and for gymnastics, and for hockey, and for netball, and for a whole host of other sports, that is very obvious when watching both men and women. If you were to put a female tennis player and a female gymnast side by side with a male tennis player and a male gymnast, you would not be able to discern an awful lot of difference, apart from a few bits of speed and aggression, between the pursuits of those two people. That is demonstrably untrue with women's football and rugby, and it is why, unfortunately, that it is not popular, I believe. On they come to the pitch. One of them has already fallen over by the time they get to the halfway line. 15 minutes into one of the contests, one of them is eating the floor. They do not look as if they have mastered the art of that particular sport, whether it's rugby or football, and that, I'm afraid, is why it isn't popular. That is why I don't like it when I am forced to watch it, or when I do watch it. What might else we say? You don't watch somebody who's, at an under 14 or an under 13s level. You don't watch somebody who obviously lacks proficiency in that sport. And unfortunately, folks, much of women's football and rugby in particular is insufferably farcical. They really are unfortunately bad at it. They are obviously bad at it and don't look like they're very, very, with a few notable exceptions, of course. And you'd probably have to speak to, somebody involved in biomechanics as to explain just as to why. But yeah, unfortunately, this does a really great article, but obsessive weirdos aside, for most of the sport's sizable queer fan base, I used to think queer was a pejorative, but apparently not, it isn't that deep. The incendiary lesbian gossip is merely another entertaining facet of a sport that is already thrillingly dramatic, and some authentic mainstream representation, largely devoid of the male gaze. Yes, that weird male gaze, folks, of course. I wonder who it is that's going to pay the astronomical wages of these so-called lesbian footballers. Who is it that's going to watch and develop commercialisation of that sport? I think it's likely to be a lot of males. So that argument is a little bit vitriolic in my opinion. But anyway, we'll move on. I think, did that classify as a Joe Spivey rant? If it did, and you're a new subscriber, then you were just subject to your first Spivanian rant. Don't worry, folks, hang in there. There are indeed many to come. So let me just flick through to something else that I enjoyed in here. There were quite a few sort of enjoyable articles. I don't know whether they were effective, but this is an article by Nazreen Malik, which talks about a life online. So she starts off with, my generation was the first to fully come of age online. I think she's a millennial. The end result is, in a word, cringe. Like every generation, we believe ourselves uniquely differentiated from the one before us. And goes on, it goes on, it goes on. Holding on to our defining identity becomes a performance, mostly online, of sustained bewilderment, of keeping age at bay. Everything laced with irony or sickly earnestness. Undergirding this is an inability to experience anything on its own terms without refracting it somehow subconsciously through two questions. How do I come out of this? And does this make me sound young? The legacy of being on the internet for 20 years. And of course, this is completely true, and rightly needles the ridiculous self-centeredness of almost everybody with an Instagram account these days, because it incentivizes you to merely just place a ridiculously quixotic and therefore unrealistic smear of brilliance of yourself. You don't post when you're hungover of a Sunday morning after 28 Bacardi and Cokes the previous evening. You don't do it when you're debilitatingly pregnant and about to give birth. You don't do it when you're hanging from the scaffolding at your 9-to-5 job as a construction worker. You only do it when you are in auspicious surroundings. And that obviously feeds into ridiculous misrepresentations of what the human experience and condition is. And you should not give your children or yourselves an Instagram account until you're at least 18, 19, 20, in my opinion, if not later. And then, I mean, there's a bit of mendacity in this. I killed Facebook a decade ago and barely on Instagram, and Twitter is broadly for work purposes. That's almost certainly untrue. If you're a human being under the age of 30 in either Western European liberal democracy or America, yada yada, you almost certainly spend 44 hours every single day looking at the comments of Sam Harris or looking just what it is Britney Spears is wearing these days. You spend most of your time looking at images of those people who would not wee on you were you on fire. These are all infantile coping mechanisms. They maintain the illusion that there is still some time for us permanent children to crack that it isn't it. That growing up is not a process of amusing grapples with booby traps, but an endlessly unsettling experience, interspersed with paralysing, epiphanic thoughts that stop you dead in your tracks. Mine is that my parents didn't screw up, that they did their best they could, and that my own children will only come to that realisation too late as well. Now, if you're parenting well, folks, your children will understand just what it is you did for them, probably at the age of about 15 or 16. That was the case with mine and my parents. But if she's probably a lackadaisical parent, a bit of a neglectful one, then of course her children won't realise that until very, very late, and they'll probably blame her for posting pictures of them on Instagram when they were but 4, I would imagine. Next up, this is Coming of Age. This is a celebrated writer, Irish writer John Banville. Again, it's not the most artistic magazine in the world. He talks about a first love, which is, I think, rendered really rather nicely in this. I'm sitting in the sun beside a wooden chalet, creosote, hot grass, the salt breeze from the sea, and she is lying on her front beside me, eyelids fluttering, a strand of auburn hair caught at the corner of her mouth. I'm reading Keats to her. Never fails, John. And eyeing between verses the sunspot gleaming on the taut curved roundel of her bare shoulder, the rose-pink indentation left by the buckle of her bra. The years have moved on. The milk-blue backs of her knees, the twin trim hillocks of her trump, crickets Just hold on there. Crickets spurt out of the grass, drunken butterflies blunder about the lupins, and I care not a fig for Provençal song and sunburnt myth. Since my Flora is here beside me, a vision, aye, but no waking dream. So that's really rather good. Yeah, just talks about a first love and goes on like that. I haven't even read any of John Banville. Anybody out there that's sufficiently acquainted with his work, please do let me know what I ought to go for. And then we do have another article, I think, in the background. It was about divorce. So let me just see if I can find it. Talk amongst yourselves, folks. This won't take too long. Yeah, essentially it was all about divorce and the weird online yearning for somebody for the new divorcee, the kind of edgy new divorcee. I can't find it without wasting 3 or 4 minutes of your time. I don't edit videos, so I'm not going to, spend 3 minutes just thumbing through something and then finally add to it. So that'll do. Yeah, not a fan of the fence. It of course meant that did I not own an asset management company in the borough of New York, I would not be able to afford this because it's £7.50 for 15 articles. That's 50 pence per 1,000 words, which is ridiculously steep, folks. To say that it is extortion would be offensive to extortioners. But yes, that was my Slashing at Hacks series. I'm usually a little more composed than that, but the article on female football really did get my bee in a bonnet. Hopefully I didn't come across as a female-hating ranter and raver. Hopefully I don't know, was at least a sort of reasonably calm and contemplative arguer of one point or another. But yes, so that was the fence. I don't do these every week, sometimes because, again, I can't bloody afford to, because everything is £8, £9 and £10. If they were £3 and £4, then I would be gulping 2 or 3 down a week. But such is life. I don't know what that is, folks. Greed, I would imagine. It's not capitalism per se, but greed. So I'm just waffling on at this point. But yes, I will be doing my Q&A over the weekend. Many of you guys have sent in some really scintillating questions that I'll be answering in what would you say, usual fashion, in my usual fashion, which is, what is my usual fashion? I'm not sure. But anyway, I am still wittering on Joe. End this bloody thing right now. So yes, that was my first Slashing at Hacks video for many of you guys that have newly subscribed. But thank you ever so much for watching BookTube, and goodbye.